What's up, guys? I'm DK, and you're watching Pro Wrestling What If, the series where I look at the different what if scenarios as terms of the world that we call professional wrestling. Now we are officially on the road to Survivor Series 2024, taking place on the other side of the country that I live in. The very same country that the topic of today's video had ended up taking place in. And I felt because we are now officially on the road to the next Survivor Series event, that I felt it was officially time that not only do I talk about the biggest what if as terms to the Survivor Series pay-per-view event, but probably the biggest what if in the history of professional wrestling. So of course, today's topic is what if the Montreal Screwjob never happened? Now for this video today, I'm going to be taking you through two alternate timelines depending on the choices that Bret Hart ends up making as terms to his professional wrestling career, and you'll understand what I mean as I go through this video. And if you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share this to all your friends, subscribe, and press the notification bell for when future episodes get released, and leave a comment down below about today's topic or suggesting a future topic for an episode of Pro Wrestling What If. So we know at the end of the day, in order for the Montreal Screwjob to not happen is for Bret the Hitman Hart to have retained the World Wrestling Federation Championship at Survivor Series. And the first one would be if Bret Hart retains the World Wrestling Federation Championship but still leaves the company for WCW. And the first place we gotta talk about is the Monday Night Raw after Survivor Series. It was discussed that Bret Hart would have a championship match, defend the championship, and actually drop it on that episode of Raw, so that way he's not vacating the title before he leaves, or in a worse scenario, actually bringing the championship with him to WCW. So I think the likely opponent that Bret Hart would be defending the World Wrestling Federation Championship against on this episode of Raw would be The Undertaker. There were rumors about Bret Hart wanting to drop the title to Ken Shamrock, but I highly doubt that Vince McMahon would be wanting to give Shamrock a run with the title, so Undertaker was a very likely suggestion that Bret Hart would have agreed to drop the title to on his way out. The following pay-per-view after Survivor Series was D-Generation X in your house. Undertaker, being the champion at this point, would defend the World Wrestling Federation Championship against The Rock. In the real timeline, The Rock had faced Stone Cold Steve Austin for the Intercontinental Championship, and Ken Shamrock would face Shawn Michaels for the world title, but it's not likely in this case for a face versus face match between Ken Shamrock and The Undertaker to happen, so having The Rock, who is a red-hot heel, fill the spot would be a likely option, while one of the other Nation of Domination members like Kama Mustafa or Farouk would be the one to challenge Austin for the Intercontinental Championship instead. While the main event, hence the pay-per-view name still being D-Generation X in your house, would be a tag team match as Shawn Michaels and Triple H of D-Generation X would take on Owen Hart and Jim Neidhart of the Hart Foundation with two special stipulations. The first stipulation being that the losing team would be forced to disband. The second stipulation is that the person taking the fall would be forced to leave the World Wrestling Federation. And in this match, D-Generation X would pick up the win as Shawn Michaels would pin Jim Neidhart, since Jim Neidhart had originally had his last match on the Raw before this event, but in this timeline would have happened at this event instead. Royal Rumble 1998. We would still have the match between Shawn Michaels against The Undertaker for the World Wrestling Federation Championship in the casket match. Due to Shawn Michaels getting the pinfall victory in the main event of the prior pay-per-view, this would allow him to become the next #1 contender to challenge for the world title at the Royal Rumble event. And like I mentioned, this is the exact same match as we've seen in the real timeline. However, this time around, it's The Undertaker walking in as the champion instead of Shawn Michaels. And everything still applies to this timeline as it did in the real timeline, where Shawn Michaels, I guess in this case, would walk out as the brand new World Wrestling Federation champion instead of retaining due to interference from Kane 13, and Undertaker would be written off until WrestleMania 14 as Kane lights the casket on fire. No Way Out of Texas, In Your House, 1998. I mentioned that everything from the real timeline still occurred at the Royal Rumble 1998 event, which also means that Shawn Michaels still suffers the back injury that he sustained during the match and wouldn't have him compete until WrestleMania 14. So basically everything from top to bottom, whether it's Kane versus Vader or even the non-sanctioned main event that had guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin, Owen Hart, and Triple H in it, would all still happen. WrestleMania 14, the same thing goes for this event. Kane and Undertaker still have their first time ever one-on-one match. Royal Rumble winner Stone Cold Steve Austin still has his match with Shawn Michaels and defeats him to become the new World Wrestling Federation champion, leading to Shawn Michaels retiring from professional wrestling due to his back injury, eventually becoming a born-again Christian and returning at SummerSlam 2002 to have that epic match against Triple H. Now we go to the other timeline, and that would be Bret Hart retaining the championship but ultimately deciding to stay with the World Wrestling Federation instead of jumping ship. So in this case, we can skip out on the Raw after Survivor Series and go straight to the D-Generation X In Your House event, which would have Ken Shamrock go up against Bret Hart for the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Like I mentioned in the real timeline, Ken Shamrock had challenged Shawn Michaels for the title at this event, and it would still go down with the same result where Ken Shamrock does win the match, except he wins via a disqualification, so Bret Hart really retains the championship. Undertaker would still have that match with Jeff Jarrett and is named the #1 contender and would challenge for the world title at the Royal Rumble event. Shawn Michaels would defend the European Championship against the British Bulldog, since in this timeline, British Bulldog doesn't request his release as the Montreal Screwjob doesn't occur here, and Shawn Michaels would retain the championship since he isn't holding the World Championship in this timeline and would likely hold the European Championship longer than he did. Royal Rumble 1998. Undertaker in this case would challenge Bret Hart instead of Shawn Michaels for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, likely to also take place in a casket match to set up Kane lighting the casket on fire to still set up the match between Undertaker and Kane at WrestleMania 14. It's also likely that Bret Hart would actually not suffer an injury during the match like Shawn Michaels did, since it probably would have been a completely different match than the one in the real timeline. Stone Cold Steve Austin would still win the 1998 Royal Rumble match, but it's unknown of whether The Rock would actually be the last one that is eliminated, since Shawn Michaels is actually a part of this match instead of being in the World Championship match, and not only guys like him, but guys like the British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart would also be in this match, as they both would have still been a part of the company, making the chances of The Rock being in the final two with Austin very slim in my opinion. No Way Out of Texas, In Your House, 1998. The World Wrestling Federation Championship would actually have been defended on the show since Bret Hart is champion at this time, unlike Shawn Michaels, who due to his back injury was not cleared to compete until defending the title at WrestleMania 14 like I mentioned. The McMahon-Austin rivalry would have been in full force regardless of whether the Montreal Screwjob had happened or not, where McMahon would have Stone Cold Steve Austin defend his WrestleMania title match opportunity against Owen Hart and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat match. However, Stone Cold overcomes the odds and still gets his match at WrestleMania. WrestleMania 14. The match we originally seen in the real timeline with Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie against the New Age Outlaws would have two additional teams added to it, being both the Hart Foundation and D-Generation X, making it a fatal four-way elimination match for the tag team championships. Now, I'm not sure what the order of elimination would be for this match. However, I would know that D-Generation X would walk out as the brand new World Wrestling Federation tag team champions, as in this case, because Shawn Michaels didn't compete in the casket match in this timeline, this means that Shawn Michaels doesn't suffer that back injury and isn't forced to retire from professional wrestling after WrestleMania 14. And with this kind of result happening, we could see a very different D-Generation X than what we had seen after WrestleMania 14 in the real timeline. Stone Cold Steve Austin would challenge Bret Hart for the World Wrestling Federation Championship in the main event. The two had faced each other the year prior at WrestleMania 13, resulting in the perfectly executed double turn and what many people consider to be one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. We've seen time and time again of great WrestleMania matches getting sequels later on. Rock vs. Austin, Michaels vs. Undertaker, and even Rhodes vs. Reigns being the most recent example, so it seems very likely for another Bret Hart vs. Stone Cold Steve Austin match to happen at WrestleMania, and especially this time for the World Championship. And like basically almost every infinite possibility, I feel that Stone Cold Steve Austin still walks out as the new World Wrestling Federation champion and would officially kick off what was the Attitude Era for the company. Now, I know that there's probably some unanswered questions as terms to these alternate timelines, so I think I'm able to answer some of these right now. Even though the Montreal Screwjob helped propel the Mr. McMahon character by making him arguably the biggest heel in professional wrestling history, I still think that even without the Screwjob, the character was going to happen. Even the seeds were planted back in September of 1997, where we first seen McMahon take the Stone Cold Stunner from Steve Austin. If Bret Hart doesn't leave for WCW like the one timeline implies and stays loyal to Vince, he would have likely had a much longer career in the business, especially never having that match with Goldberg in WCW that ended his career originally. And if Bret Hart were to have stayed with the World Wrestling Federation and not jumped to WCW, there actually could have been a chance where Bret would have been able to be by Owen's side to the point where the Blue Blazer doesn't happen and Owen Hart would still be alive today because the incident at Over the Edge 1999 would have not occurred.